In today's episode, we're talking about something heavy but important: online catfishing, sextortion, or blackmail, whatever you want to call it. These are words we never want to associate with our kids, but unfortunately, they're becoming more common. Today, I'm joined by Danielle, a mom whose teenage son was recently tricked into sending a nude photo to someone he thought was a classmate. That person turned out to be a scammer who tried to blackmail him. So, we're going to talk about how this happened, what Danielle and her family did next, and how you can protect your own kids. I'm your host, Sarah Panus, and this is Keep Kids Safe. I know the world can feel scary when you're trying to raise kids who love Jesus and stay safe. That's why this show exists, to help Christian parents like you understand the real dangers kids face today, like online exploitation and trafficking, without getting overwhelmed. Each episode gives you trusted insights from experts, hopeful stories, and a few trivia moments so you can feel more informed, less anxious, and better equipped to protect the kids you love and those kids you don't even know. Let's get into today's episode. But first, let's center ourselves in truth with this verse that I feel is applicable from the Bible, from Luke 8:17, related to this topic of sending things online to other people that we don't want people to know about. Okay? So Luke 8:17 says, "For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open." Let's bring these hidden dangers into the light so we can protect our kids and guide them through the mess with faith, love, and clear next steps. Okay, so with that, take us back to the moment, Danielle, that you discovered what had happened with your son and how your family kind of first became aware something was off.
It had been kind of a travel hectic week for me, and I hadn't really seen my oldest for a couple of days for any length of time. And I had put our youngest to bed, and when I came out, his door was closed. And so I knocked on it and, kind of popped my head in, and he was just laying on his bed, scrolling on his phone. And so I hopped down to try to engage and see, how he's doing and check in. And he was very, very quiet. And so I did my mom thing, which is let's check your grades. So started kind of scrolling online and asking why, he was missing assignments and the usual. And he was not engaging at all. And so I kind of dismissed it as, he's tired or whatever, went to get up to leave. And he popped out of bed and slammed the door before I could leave. And I mean, just lost it. He had become very emotional and just kept saying, I did something really bad. I did something really, really bad, really, really bad. So, in that instant moment, I kind of took this pause and I tell people when I tell this story that I image wise, I was like in a room with a ton of file cabinets. It was just a wall of file cabinets.
Right.
And I had all of these file cabinets that I was considering of what this really bad thing could be. And he quickly said, I took a picture and I sent it. So I instantly knew where we were headed. I got to that one file cabinet and was like, okay, well, which of the drawers am I opening? And so in that moment, he was obviously very emotionally upset, very stressed. And I just really kept trying to breathe and to just be as steady and not react. Like that was my goal, was just don't react, just listen and be calm. And so we sat down on his bed and I said, can you show me what you're using? So it happened to have been on Snapchat. I have Snapchat. I'm horrible at it, but I just try to keep up with the tools that they're using. And so I had opened mine, he had his open, and I tried to see if I could see his interactions or anything that had happened in that app. And he gave me a couple of the details as to what was shared. Basically, he had engaged with someone he thought was a friend from school. It was a very common girl's name, Isabella, and there are four of them in his grade. And so he assumed he was interacting with that individual and had engaged back and forth. And within about 3 to 4 hours of this interaction going back and forth, Isabella sent an inappropriate photo and then he returned it. And Isabella immediately came back with, you need to send me $300 or I'm going to send this picture, and then had screenshotted his friend list, which included my mom
Mm.
and three of his best friends. He instantly knew that he had been, catfished, and he blocked the account And so by the time that I had engaged, that account was no longer accessible. We couldn't find it. It had been completely removed from anything we could find in Snapchat. At that point, I said, okay, I need you to sit here for 10 minutes. So this was late at night. It was probably 9:30 on a Tuesday, I think, if I
Okay.
remember correctly. Typically I go to bed, like I'm like already going into bed and reading, and my husband goes and gets to watch a couple shows in the news and stuff by himself and quiet. And so I told my son, I said, I need you to give me 10 minutes, sit up here for 10 minutes. I need to go talk to your dad. And I need to talk to him, just the two of us, and then you can come down. And I said, so look at the clock, gave him the time frame and said, don't come down. So then I went downstairs and told my husband, turn off the TV. We got to talk. He's like, are you getting divorced? I said, no, no, we're
His
not getting
file cabinet was going at that point too, right? Of
Yes,
all the possibilities.
exactly, exactly. And sat down, explained the situation, and gave him the moment to have his out of body reactions like, what
Right.
the heck is going on? We just talked about this. How did we get here? Why did this happen? And we started to process as a family as to how do we get through this and what should we do next?
It's the moment no parent wants to hear, of course, but unfortunately, it is becoming more common where people are doing this to exploit minors
Exactly.
because they know that minors are more trustworthy, their red flags aren't going up as much as adults would. I think this is a good spot to interject a trivia question, and I'll give you the answer after this, and it'll be a nice segue into what we talk about next. What percentage of teens have been approached by a stranger online? Is it 12%, 24%, 40%, or 60%? What do you think, Danielle? You want to take a guess?
It's got to be 60.
You're close. It's actually 40. So thankfully it's not 60.
Yes.
This comes from thorn.org research, which they do a lot of great research related to these topics. So a credible source. Hopefully it doesn't continue to increase, but still 40% is almost half. It's almost half of
Yes.
kids and teens specifically that are being approached by a stranger online. I know you had mentioned this. Your husband's like, how did this happen? We talked to him about this. What was going through your mind that moment related to what you guys had already talked about?
So in that moment, it literally felt like I don't understand, right? We had this whole conversation. We actually have a friend that has kids that are 3 years ahead of us, and this had happened with their son. And the topic went from that topic of getting inappropriate photos exchanged, as well as what you post and share on your social media accounts can carry with you into college applications. And so that's kind of the topic that we had discussed with our friends, and it was our whole family was all talking about it together. And so it was a very casual, safe environment. And we had also talked about, there was a recent article at the time where there was a D1 athlete who had an exchange in their senior year and ultimately committed suicide within 6 hours of this exchange because they had paid the initial amount of money. Well, then they came back and asked for more, and this poor kid
Mm.
didn't have it and just thought everything was over at that point. And so talking about it in that level of the outcomes that have happened from this type of an exchange, I think, to be honest, enabled my son to tell me as quickly as he did. I mean, it was within that 6 hour time frame. And do I think he was going to that extent? I don't. But I think being able to have that conversation already out in front of us, it wasn't a scary topic for him to bring up that it would be a surprise or completely out of context. I think as we talked about it with him, I certainly said, we just talked about this, which
Mhm.
honestly, in the moment, looking back on it, I wish we wouldn't have brought that up because it felt like it made him even dumber or more shameful about the situation. But it grounded us in something we'd already talked about in a non stressful situation. Also, at that time, I actually just Googled what to do. I literally typed it in, what to do when your son sends a inappropriate photo and is asked for money, and a parenting article had come up with 5 steps. And so I literally just followed that. And as this was happening, my son was so upset. He had puked a couple of times as we were talking through it. You could just see the stress and anxiety. And so we have a dog, and my son's not really a dog person, but I literally said, okay, you sit on the floor and hold the dog, which instantly calmed him down. I mean, it was magic. And my husband and I just kept talking through these steps of, okay, next, first up is, do we know the people? We don't. Okay, that step's done. Second step was calling the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And so we did that. And like you said, Sarah, this is such a big issue that there are these resources available. And at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, it was two rings and a human being answered the phone and then directed me to an FBI agent. And I was engaged with that agent for probably about 10 minutes and trying to give as much information about the situation as I could. And this became an actual case for them, and took as much information as I could. In that moment, the one thing I did not have was the username of the account. So all we had was the handle, the Isabella. And so we were missing a critical piece of information. So, side plug on that is, if you're in this situation, make sure you get the usernames and screenshot as much as you can. And then they recommended we call the local police department and file a case with them as well. And so called our local police department. They had said we could do a virtual, or they could send two officers to the house. I'm a believer in making sure that every lesson is a really good learning moment. And so I opted to have the officers come to our house to do that. And so in that meantime, we just kept talking and trying to reassure our son that this is just part of life and something that I'm really glad he shared with us, and this will pass, but we've got to take these next steps. Eventually, I think it was probably about an hour and a half, the officers came out to the house, talked through it. The one gentleman was very versed in social media. So he was walking through this and telling me way more things about Snapchat that I didn't understand, and ultimately kept going through, here's the things that you need to do to set up to prevent this from happening, and how and like you said, with how many people are being targeted, they're getting really savvy. They're getting very creative, and they're finding ways to engage with these kids that really break down that barrier very quickly and get them to trust. So they really got to be on their game and questioning as much as they possibly can, because the game keeps changing. It was really informative. It was a hard lesson to learn in the moment, but it was really informative.
It's so great that your son told you, because we've all heard those awful stories of these kids committing suicide. I
Yes.
heard a story of another kid who that happened to, and it was on Instagram. He committed suicide in the middle of the night, and I remember his parents' quote that it just like, ugh, just cut my heart. Was
Yes.
like, he said, Instagram basically murdered my son overnight. No, Instagram didn't
Yes.
specifically, but just it was like this silent killer that happened, and they had no say in any of it. So I'm so glad that your son came to you, and I think it is
Exactly.
because, like you said, because you'd already had the conversation. Would you have loved him to have listened and not done anything? Yes, right? But thank God he came to you and talked through it. I'll put the links of the steps too for that national center that you mentioned, of the
Perfect.
steps. So folks, if you're listening, we'll have some real concrete steps in the show notes so that you can know or share with anyone else. So you called them, you talked to the FBI, gave them whatever information you had. Then they directed you to the local police. You talked with them. The fact that the police knew so much about it is also just shows how much this is happening, which is why we need to
Yes.
do what we can as parents to help protect our kids and give them information, but also know what to do to combat it so that these people hopefully get busted and stop doing
Exactly.
this, and this isn't as common of a thing, because obviously they're doing it because it's profitable and it's working, and so we need to stop that.
Exactly.
We need to slice it off at the root of the problem. So then now what happens? Is there risk that these pictures are out there? Because that's what everyone's worried about. That, oh my gosh, other people are going to see these pictures. What was your takeaway after everything you went through? Is that still a
So
concern, or is there a way to kind of scrub the internet, if you will, and not have them be there?
So, a couple of takeaways. One was the police officer had shared, and actually the FBI agent had shared, that because he's a male, it doesn't get as much money on the black market. It doesn't typically go very far. And that, as a female, is just a gut punch, right?
Gross. Yeah.
Because it's just really a very different situation for females. And so I think that was one that has prompted me to talk to my nieces, to talk to other of my friends who have girls, to just be a little bit more sensitive to it. And the second thing was that because my son so quickly blocked the individual and they dropped from the site as that name, likely it was a human being that was interacting with them, because typically the bots that are running that are trying to get people to click, they take a little bit longer to detect that that's happening, I guess. And so they had suggested that they thought it was someone who was, actively engaging. And then the third thing that happened was one of the police officers had said, well, at least your face wasn't in the picture. And I kind of paused for a second because I thought, oh, I didn't even connect the dots on that. As I have gone to events or wanted to share photos of my kids for different things, you can use AI in your phone on your photos to say you can identify which kid it is, right? And then it
Yeah.
can bring up all of their historical photos. And so that facial recognition technology has come so far that that's another aspect of what is shared that really matters in probably how far or how risky that photo is on getting into the internet. That is probably a little bit more of a direct conversation again with your kids about this in a non-stressful situation of why it matters. And so there's now technology where you can take that image and do a reverse image search for it. They also have tools when you talk with the FBI agents now that weren't ready yet when this situation happened with my son. Basically, they will go through and they will comb through and find that on the dark web to be able to remove that image. And you probably need to do it maybe every 3 months, 6 months to just make sure that it still hasn't gone out there. But if their face is on it, it also can get tagged to their name because if their photo has been anywhere with their name next to it, it bridges more data gaps, if you will, than just what was initially shared. And so, as we had gone through this afterwards, our goal was to one, go to sleep that night after this exchange, which was a little more difficult. I had called my friend that we had had this conversation with first thing in the morning. And another really tactical thing she had said, so you may want to get your son a new phone case because his phone case was very identifiable. It was a unique custom phone case that he had gotten for his birthday. And I didn't even think about it, right? But it was in the image. And so that was one of the decisions. She said, you can either let him sit in it, go to school, and if it was shared, he can't deny it because it's his phone case.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, or you go get him a new phone case. And so we had that conversation first thing in the morning. And so we drove to Walmart and got him a new case because I just thought he's already been through enough. Let's give him a little bit of grace here and try to prevent it from becoming a bigger issue. And then the last thing that we did was talk to our school resource officer that morning as well. And she had shared that she gets a call probably 3 times a week for this type of activity.
Wow.
And she said that the only time it has ever shown up has been when it's been a friend to friend sharing. But these types of things where it's an unknown person, she has never had it in her 6 years of working with a middle school and a high school. She had never had it actually come out in the school day. And so she gave us a little confidence there. But again, another nugget for parents to just think about if it's an exchange between friends or people in the school, a little different sensitivity as to how it needs to be handled and how you need to engage the parents very quickly and the schools to get a hold of that information and get it deleted off of their phones.
Wow, wow. And I was doing some research. I think this is a good spot to put in my second trivia question. What is a common tactic scammers use to get kids to share explicit images online? I'm going to give you options. Pretending to be a celebrity, offering money or gifts, catfishing as a teen peer, which we know because you just have been talking about that one, or all of the above. So it is all of the above. Everything, right? Basically, they're pretending it's whatever they can do to try to build some false sense of trust and connection
Exactly.
with your kid. And because kids' prefrontal cortex, where they make smart decisions, isn't developed until they're like in their 20s, they don't have that all figured out. So we can look at it, right, Danielle, as parents and be like, what are you doing? We just talked about this. Unfortunately, that doesn't always work, but having that dialogue and those conversations helps prevent it from becoming even more serious. Thank you for reaching out to share your firsthand experiences because I think we all hear these stories and we think, "Oh, will never happen to me." I know you thought that, right? You never thought this would what the heck?
Yeah.
Like, this will never happen. And unfortunately, stuff does because we're tempted to sin, I guess, in this world, right, as human beings, and things come up, and there's that darkness around us, and we have to be that light and figure it out. But knowing that it's not the end of the world, I think is the most important thing as parents to emphasize with their kids so that they're not taking the extreme and committing suicide, and doing things from a self-harm perspective. So kudos to you for I would say, first of all, to me, it tells me your son trusts you. You have a loving relationship because that you've established that he, as nervous as he was, opened up. And then you
Yes.
were able to calmly, after you had time to settle down, I'm sure, figure out what to do and sharing these next steps. Because you have like national level, you have FBI, you have local level with your city police, then you have school level. So this is great to know that there's a lot of different resources to go down that chain of command. As we close up here, any final tip or anything you'd like to say to parents listening right now that are scared that this could happen to their child, what would you say to them?
There's a couple of things that I've learned as my kids have grown into their teenage years and off to college. And finding that friend that's a couple of years ahead of you to just talk about what's going on and what they're experiencing because it's different than the way we grew up. Being actively engaged in how the teens are growing up today or just kids in general are growing up and what they're getting exposed to is just it's important to have kind of a foot in that world. And then another aspect of advice I would give to parents that maybe have kids just starting middle school or going into that high school age and getting smartphones for the first time. We had a rule, 12 was our rule, and I will tell you it is really difficult peer pressure wise, coach wise, and parent wise to hold tight to that rule. It just was a number we had picked and we've stuck to it. But once they get that phone, there's a lot of kind of oversight that you can give, but eventually you got to let them fly, and you have to start letting them understand the scope of it. When you get to that point, the other thing that I think happens is your kids are so needy when they're young, and you always know what they want. When they get into that middle school and high school, they start to get quieter, and those moments to hear what they want become fewer and far between. And so when the kids are silent when they're young, you got to go run over there and figure out what's going on because that's never a good sign when they're quiet. When they're teenagers, that's your opportunity to have these conversations. Car rides when you're riding to and from a practice or an activity, or late at night, go pop in like I did and just sit down and try to engage with them and have those conversations. I think those are two areas that have allowed us to have this type of conversation and build that trust and to get more confident in how to handle these situations when they come up. Knock
Perfect.
on wood.
They know, perfect. And parents, you can decide after you listen to this if you want to listen to it with your kid. Like if you have a kid and you feel like this would be a good firsthand experience for them to learn from, like, see, this happens, don't do this. That's decisions up to you. But I think it helps to make it real versus like, oh, mom or dad, you're just being like so paranoid. I have a son. I have a teenager and I have a 10-year-old daughter as I'm recording this. And I get that all the time. Oh, mom, you're just so cautious. Like, you're so worried. I'm like, it's because I know stuff and I'm learning more and I'm going to be even more cautious. Right. But that we're the parents. That's our job. I mean, our job is to use our prefrontal cortex and be smart with decisions and things and to help them. So don't let that deter you guys. It's our job to help protect our kiddos and equip them to go out into the world as they grow up. So if you get an eye roll or whatever, that's fine. It's worth it to make sure they come to you when they really need to, like your son did with you, Danielle. Thank you so much for
Exactly.
being on. This was really informative. Appreciate it.